Welcome back, and now we're going to take a look around the pitch correction control section of the interface over here. Now first up is the retune speed control, this one here, and this controls how fast or how slow auto-tune acts upon the material that it's being fed. And the number's in milliseconds, so at the moment it's showing 0, meaning auto-tune will react immediately that it sees something, giving us a very synthesized and fake effect. And over here, at 400 milliseconds, it's probably too slow to do anything worthwhile unless it's controlling a long note. But within that range, you can usually get exactly what you're after. Now, just to give an example of how it works, I'm going to put it back to 0. And at the moment we're in bypass, as you can see. Now I'm going to play one of the example files that comes on your auto-tune disc or can be downloaded from the website. And it's basically just a sweep tone going from A, going up to the A an octave above and back down again. So it sounds like this. So that's what it naturally sounds like. Now, if I unbypass auto-tune and play it with auto-tune in a chromatic mode here, so all 12 tones of the chromatic scale are allowable, and the retune speed's on 0, so here's what we get now. Right, so we don't get the sweeping parts in between, we just get these quantized values on the 12 whole notes. And so to take that to another notch, if I take it away from chromatic and put it on, say, major, so now it's forcing it to an A major scale, we get this. And A minor. And so I'll put it back to A major, and if we start to relax now this retune speed, listen to the difference it makes. So you've heard it hard quantizing at 0. If I stretch it back to, say, 20 or so. Right, so it still sounds like an A major scale, but it's kind of like a synthesizer with the portamento feature turned on. Now if I slow this right down, so it almost does nothing. It sounds very similar to how it sounds in bypass. And that's simply because auto-tune is not jumping on very quick. It's taking 200 milliseconds before it even grabs a note, and by then the next one's passed. So its effect is almost nothing in this case. Now as we go further into the tutorial, we'll be using this to tune actual real vocals, but just to show the raw effect of the control, it's very easy to use this sort of example. So let's move on to the humanized control now. Now auto-tune is smart enough to distinguish the long notes from the short notes in a singer's performance. So you might have a relatively fast retune speed that's grabbing the notes quite quickly, but this may suffer when the singer gets to, say, a long held note and the retune speed remains fast, kind of holding them to this robotic sort of sound. But Humanize actually intelligently lets the algorithm relax on those long notes. So I'll show you a little example here, but I'll just make a few changes to set up for this. So I'll switch that over into soprano mode. I'll put that down to chromatic. I'll take the retune speed to the fastest. And I'll just play a little phrase here. Now have a listen to the last note of this phrase.
The hurt inside, it's all left behind.
Okay, now that last note's an E. Just to make this a bit more obvious, I'll do some things in the scale section here. Now we will talk about this in the next movie, so don't worry about the detail yet. But I'm going to remove all notes and I'm going to allow the note E only. So simply I'm forcing every note to an E. Now I'll just play that very last bit.
Behind.
Okay, so you can hear that one more time.
Behind.
Okay, now we're being forced to an E, but listen to how robotic that last note is, again.
Behind.
Now, if I lift up the humanized control here, because it's a sustained note, auto-tune will actually let some of the human life back into that note, despite the fact that I've told it, you lock onto this E note and, don't give me any leeway. But in this case, it'll give a little bit of human leeway just in terms of the length of the note.
Behind.
Okay, now forget the fact that it goes off at the end there, but you can hear how it's more natural. It's allowing the vibrato on the note to breathe a little bit, and it sounds like a real note again. I'll play it again.
Behind.
Right, now I'll pull it back to 0.
Behind. Behind.
So you can hear the effect there, that it's actually letting the note breathe. Now I know it's a kind of an ugly example in that respect, but just for that little section in the middle of the note, it does sound quite human, as the name says. Okay, next up we're going to look at this targeting ignores vibrato feature. So for that I've got another little preset set up, and it's the wide vibrato example that is again included with the program when you buy it. So let's have a listen to that in bypass. Now this is a male voice with a very, very wide vibrato.
Lord.
Now look down at the keyboard here, and this is showing us what auto-tune is detecting. And we can see that while it is a G predominantly, every now and then the vibrato is so wide that it actually flicks out a semitone up and a semitone down from there. So just keep your eye down here. Okay, so given that's the case, and we'll leave auto-tune in this chromatic mode, if I unbypass auto-tune now, and I've set it to a retune speed of 24, which is a realistic retune speed for a standard vocal performance, let's listen to what happens. The situation's actually got worse. It sounded better when auto-tune was bypassed in terms of pitch accuracy, and that's because auto-tune's doing its job. When the vibrato gets too wide, it clearly thinks, well, this must be a different note. So auto-tune drags it up or down to the different note, thinking that that's what the singer intended. Now, in this case, we know it's not what the singer intended, and so we can say to auto-tune, ignore the vibrato. Be smart enough to realise that this is actually vibrato and not the guy actually changing notes. So I'll play it one more time as it is, and then I'm going to engage targeting ignores vibrato. So this is without. Okay, now here is on. Now on the pitch change amount meter here, you can see the work that auto-tune is doing. So with it off, it's not moving nearly as much. It only gets to that sort of 25% section there. And then it changes into a different note. Whereas with targeting ignoring vibrato, you can see that it's smart enough to realise this is the same note, and it knows it has to work even harder to keep it on that G. So big swings, right down to below 50 here. So that's a really, really useful function. And I'll just show another example of this to show how powerful this is. We're going to jump over into graphical mode. Now, don't worry, we're going to deal with graphical mode in great detail later. And the first thing we'll do is just track that note in graphical mode so auto-tune has it in its system. So there we go, I've tracked the performance in. Now this red line is showing the detection that auto-tune has come up with, and this is what it's seeing. So you can see how wide the swings are. I mean, it's always going up to the next note there, but down here it's almost down at that note. So it's a very wide swing. Auto-tune's got that in his memory now, so I can go back to auto and set up my auto parameters the way I need here. Now what we're going to do, push the retune speed up to 0, so now it's super fast in auto mode. Targeting ignores vibrato is off. Now we're going to switch back into graphical mode. Now there's a function here which we're going to discuss in detail later called import auto. And what that does is it takes whatever the current settings are in auto mode and brings them in to the graphical mode for further editing ideally. So in this case it allows us though to see what auto mode is doing, but in a nice graphical way as well. So if I click that, right, now we can see in the settings that we have over here, that's what auto-tune is doing. Now this green line here refers to the output. So we can see at this point he's pushing it up there, down here he takes a few down notes, and we can play it and hear the evidence for ourselves. Okay, not pretty. If we go back to auto now and put targeting ignores vibrato on, now we switch back to graphical mode, and then we can erase this importation with the next importation. Watch what happens. Suddenly now we've got this green line which is virtually flatlining through the middle of the whole thing. And if we play that, it's pretty much a straight G note the whole way through. So that shows the intelligence of the algorithm in knowing what's vibrato and what's the singer actually changing notes. So very clever there. And sticking with the vibrato theme, we'll now move on to the natural vibrato mode here. And what this does is simply takes the vibrato that's naturally occurring in the singer and either exaggerates it a bit more or tames it, whatever is needed. I'm going to bypass all here, and as I said, we'll cover this in the next movie. So what we're doing at this point is auto-tune is not trying to grab any pitches. I have bypassed every single pitch. So we're just going to hear the natural performance now as if I'd bypassed the whole plugin. So now I can boost the natural vibrato without auto-tune interfering by trying to tune it. or pull the natural vibrato down. See, what's interesting there is that by watching the pitch change amount meter here, we can see exactly what auto-tune is doing to just remove the vibrato. Now, this is not auto-tune changing the pitch because it's trying to conform to any sort of scale or do any sort of correction. We've turned all that off. We've bypassed it all. This is auto-tune just picking up the vibrato in the voice and compensating for it when we say, take it all away. So I'll make this the absolute lowest it could be. And look how aggressively it's dancing. And now that pitch change you can hear where he starts to go a little bit flat, that's actually the fundamental of his voice now going flat, not being masked by all the vibrato around it. So as you can see, just this little section here gives us a whole ton of potential in what we can do. So that's the pitch correction controls, and next up we're going to look at this scale section here in more detail. So see you there.